So this last breakout session is going to be on big data and intelligence-based medicine, and it's going to be presented by Dr. Anthony Chang, who is a pediatric cardiologist and Chief Intelligence and Innovation Officer for the Medical Intelligence and Innovation Institute at the Children's Hospital of Orange County, which is funded by the Sharon Disney Lund Foundation, and also Dr. Spyro Mousses, the Executive Scientific Advisor for the Medical Intelligence and Innovation Institute as well. So please join me in welcoming both of them to tell us more about this wonderful and exciting cutting-edge area of work.
Thank you very much. Given that it's Friday afternoon, we thought we'd do something a little bit different than giving you just a straight, 40-minute PowerPoint presentation. We're going to do a little conversation with my partner, Spyro. And we're just going to go over, I think, kind of give you a survey of what's happening in AI in medicine. And then I think what we really like to do is save ample time for your questions. I had a morning session today in San Diego. I was just really pleased with the Q&A period. So we're going to try to do this as fast as we can. So forgive us for the speed that we're going to go through these slides. It's more to just introduce you to some of the ongoing developments in artificial intelligence. Right, so just a little bit of introduction. So those of you who are familiar with or have children, there's Pokemon Go. Actually, adults are playing this too. And a typical day on Wall Street with billions of interactions. And this is the autonomous driving car from Google. So all of these things, all the dimensions in our lives now have something in common, which is artificial intelligence. So just a little bit of a history. Alan Turing, who's a British mathematician, or the father of artificial intelligence, wasn't really known here, especially in this country, until the movie came out, The Imitation Game. How many people saw that, by the way? Okay, so most of you. And then this was a Dartmouth conference in 1956, when the term artificial intelligence was actually coined. And then my personal odyssey in artificial intelligence started February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, or a cardiologist's favorite holiday. And it was when a supercomputer Watson beat the human contestants, I realized that artificial intelligence is really here to stay this time. And even though, as you know, it went through 2 renditions earlier in the 70s and then early 90s and didn't take hold. And that was the night that I applied for the Stanford data science program, trying to educate myself in artificial intelligence. Now, how many people saw this or are aware of what's happening with the game Go? Okay, a few of you. So the game Go is an ancient Chinese board game that is far more complex than chess, which, as you know, IBM Computer beat handily about 20 years ago. So Go has so many configurations that the number of configurations on the board outnumbers the number of atoms in the universe. So it's 10 to the 170 possible configurations. So everyone, including AI experts, felt it's going to be another decade before a supercomputer can beat a human champion in Go. And guess what? They were all wrong, because the supercomputer DeepMind that Google bought beat the human champion in March. So in other words, AI is not only here, but it's improving at a rapid pace, far faster than anyone expected. So this is unfortunately what you see in the media when you talk about AI, and even relatively good magazines sort of make you think that AI is all about the robot. So the number one takeaway this afternoon, it's not about the robot. Okay? It is not about the robot. And it is, unfortunately, even AI in healthcare. This is a typical thing you get when you Google and search for AI in healthcare. There's the robot again, Cute, but it's a robot still. So what we want to impress on you is the number 2 takeaway. It's not about the robot, but it's more about harnessing a special new resource and energy that's going to enlighten a lot of dark areas in medicine. Dark in the sense of not knowing, not evil, but in the sense of that we don't know a lot of things in medicine. So I'm going to hand over to Spyro real quick, and he's going to tell you why now. Why is AI so important and so relevant to medicine now?
Well, as a lot of you know, you're very interested in seeing if there can be new diagnostics. A lot of you are on diagnostic odysseys. You're trying to figure out what's wrong with you or your children. The reality is we just don't know. Powerful technologies like genomics are helping, but you heard this morning that the hard part of genomics is not generating the data, it's on understanding the data. And quite frankly, we don't understand the data. So that's my background. What I do is I study genomes and I try to interpret them. And the reality is there's just so much complexity in the data that we just can't understand them. What Anthony's done very nicely here is showed you a pyramid that starts with data. As you go up, you want to translate that data into information and knowledge. But ultimately, the only beings in the universe that can do this are human beings, because we have this brain. But it doesn't have the capacity to deal with billions of genomic pieces of information. So where we want to get to is the point where we can use machines that can learn. These are some algorithms. I think these are Anthony's algorithms from Stanford, right? Is that right? So Anthony's been programming using machine learning to interpret genomic information. And there's various approaches to use algorithms to mimic what the human brain does. We go on the next slide. Do you want to talk a little bit about the dimensions of what we mean when we talk about big data?
Yeah, so one of the exciting things about medicine now is there's so much data that's available. We finally can be comfortable saying there is really great big data in healthcare. And unfortunately, we'll talk about some of the limitations later, but most of the data in medicine, particularly in the imaging area, has not been in existence for until about 2 or 3 years ago. So the vast amount of medical data has only been accumulating in the last few years. Go ahead.
So what excites me about artificial intelligence? It's this graph. It's the fact that it's exponential. So if you think about learning and linear growth in knowledge, linear growth in our ability to diagnose disease, come up with new therapeutics, it's all slow. It takes decades and it's linear. The power of AI is that it's exponential, right? You can have a doubling of the amount of knowledge each year. You can have the doubling of the amount of computational power. According to Ray Kurzweil, the amount of artificial intelligence, the power of supercomputers with artificial intelligence today will keep doubling and surpass human intelligence very quickly. Now, that's nothing to be scared about. That's something to be excited about, because that's what we need to cure a lot of these very difficult diseases, right? We need to know what part of the genome is affected, what the phenotypes, how they match, and how we can develop therapeutics. And the only way we can get there in our lifetimes is with artificial intelligence. So what do we need in terms of, okay, it's easy to say artificial intelligence. What does that mean? What's the basis of that? Well, we talked about big data with a lot of volume and a lot of veracity and so forth. We need infrastructure, right? If we're going to share data, if we're going to, you heard this morning about 1 million genomes coming together from the President's Precision Medicine Initiative. Where are we going to store all those? There aren't data centers that can handle that sort of thing. Cloud computing provides an environment that is like a utility. You don't have to worry about how many servers you have or how many chips you have. It's like a utility. You plug and play. So cloud computing is transformative because we can have as much scalable, flexible, elastic compute as needed. So that's an important component of the infrastructure.
We coined the phrase intelligence as a service.
Right.
So you know about storage as a service and all the computing terms about the scalability of something you have. So in the future, you can actually store as a service and then do intelligence as a service. So you want to talk about cloud computing as well?
Right. So once you have that infrastructure, if you have cloud computing, you can store, and you have the compute capability. The next thing is analytics. And analytics have also, there's also a transformation in the field in terms of analytics. We no longer talk about just algorithmic approaches. We start talking about cognitive computing. Cognitive computing are two words you're familiar with: cognitive, thinking, and computing. But it's a transformation in how we think about computer science. So the example that Anthony talked about, the example of having Watson, IBM's Watson, beat the Jeopardy champion, The way it was able to do that is use this very new approach to computation, which just started. So we are at the turning point in history. If we go to the next slide, we can talk more. So you want to talk a little bit about how cognitive computing helps data mining, Anthony?
Sure. So data mining and machine learning are all sort of relatively new terms that we're all going to be familiar with in the very near future. So data mining, as the name implies, is you take very unstructured data, which is the majority of healthcare data, and you structure it somehow and then mine the data for new information. So essentially, what we're trying to do is trying to magnify or maximize the signal in the noise of healthcare data. So that's going to be the next challenge, is take all of this unstructured data in healthcare and mine the data for new information. Here's one of Spyro's favorite topics as well as mine. So
there's many approaches to machine learning. One of the most exciting recent advances has been a new type of artificial neural net called deep learning. Deep learning is the ability to autonomously and without supervision look at data and find patterns. In the past, most of the data mining that we've done starts with a scientific question. Now, machines can look at an image and figure out what that image is if you give it enough images. So Google has been, for example, looking at billions of images online, and eventually the computer figures out the difference between a human and a cat. Now, that may not sound impressive because all of you can do it. What's impressive is nobody coded that algorithm. Just like I showed you Anthony's algorithm, he coded that. Nobody coded the ability for the machine to do that. Machines are learning how to distinguish things on their own in the same way that a baby brain is learning how to distinguish these things.
So this is a graph or a diagram showing you how Google's DeepMind, the deep learning company, was able to play the game Go. And I often get asked the question, can computers think? Or will you think computers ever be able to think? And I think during one of the games, the computer made a move that made no sense to any human player, and also had made a move that it had not learned from previous millions of games that had witnessed. So in other words, it was a very creative moment, and it led to a winning game. So I think that's as close to thinking as I think we can say a computer can do. So relevance to healthcare, which is why you're here. We have some major issues, missing data in healthcare. Oftentimes you look through the medical records, or when clinicians do research, there's a lot of missing data. As a matter of fact, there's so much missing data that books are written about the topic. All right? Why is that an issue? Well, it's going to affect data mining for sure. The other problem is unstructured data, as I mentioned. This is a photograph I took of the beach stones north of here, and look at the heterogeneity of the beach stones, and it reminds me of healthcare data, because if you think about pathology slides, cardiac imaging, EHR, genomic information, it's extremely unstructured, and it will be very important for clinicians particularly to understand that having more structured data is going to give us a much higher yield. This is a typical sign-out sheet that some of you are familiar with. One of our nurse practitioners for a cardiac intensive care unit, there's a load of information here, but it's very difficult for the computer to extract this information because it's basically human language and it's unstructured. And escalating data is another problem in healthcare. The amount of information, as you see in these graphics here, is doubling used to be every 5 years, now it's 18 months. So there are more than something like 10 million medical publications out there, and there's no way any human physician or clinician can take in all that information in a time that physicians have less and less time to read. So it's commonly said that by the year 2020, which is just around the corner, doctors will face 200 times the amount of medical data that any human can possibly process. So in other words, the escalating amount of data is really a major issue. Without artificial intelligence, it will be a major issue. Another problem is all the future data So this is wearable technology that I think you heard about earlier. Where are we going to put all that data and how we're going to interpret all that data? Because all of that is coming in what I call a tsunami of data. So we could either, well, here it says swim or surf because we're in Huntington Beach here, but I think most people are so daunted by this big data that they're going to feel like they're drowning in big data when in fact it's an amazing and historical opportunity that's coming our way right now. So all of this leads to the conundrum in healthcare, which is we don't need more data. We just need more intelligent way of analyzing the data for getting more information and solving the diagnostic dilemmas that you heard about. All right, you want to talk about the rocket chip?
Sure. I never disagree with my colleague, but I'm gonna challenge him on something. We always need more data. As a scientist, I cringe.
No, I just meant at the present time.
Absolutely.
We're not using data that we have. That's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're swamped with data, but we want more. We have computation, but we want better computation. This analogy is actually very fit. So what we have is data as fuel, and the rocket is artificial intelligence or machine learning. You need both, right? And right now, the fuel is in little tranches all over the place. It's in this hospital. It's in your computer. It's all over the place. All the fuel needs to be put together, put into the rocket ship so we can move knowledge forward. If we need to get to the moon, we need to think about pooling all of this data, right? Whether we have enough data or we can get more data is not the question. The question is, who's building the rocket ship?
So again, I had a nice talk with a group of hospital leaders today, and they were asking me, what's the most pressing problem in artificial intelligence today? And I said, probably the inability to share data. I think the technology in artificial intelligence is fairly robust right now, but what we lack is the ability to pull everyone's data so that we can work on that data. So in terms of artificial intelligence in medicine, man had admired bird in flight for a long time and eventually understood aerodynamics, right? Initially, I think the Greeks were trying to imitate the bird by having wings, and it didn't work well. And then that led to the present state plane here that can fly faster and higher than any bird can, right? So I think I see that for artificial intelligence with a few elements. This is my friend Spyro's contribution to all of this. You want to tell them about the hypergraph?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I'm glad you showed the picture of the bird, because the term for that idea of taking ideas from biology and applying them to some other field is called biomimicry, right? What it means is, in this case, we didn't want to build a brain, right? In the same way that you don't want to build a bird. What you want to do is you want to understand the fundamental principles by how flight happens. How does the bird fly? Once you understand those principles, then you can apply them. So once you have, for example, aerodynamics, now you can interpret aerodynamics, translate it, and build something. So that's what we did, and this is a 10-year-old project where we started with mimicking how the brain remembers things. And it remembers things as a graph. So we didn't build neurons, we built computer graphs that borrow from the idea of how the brain uses those basic principles of how the brain links information. So if you remember grandma, and you remember how grandma looks, how grandma smells, and how grandma sounds, right? Next time you smell mothballs, you're going to remember grandma, right? That's what happens here. So we've connected all of these data points together, so they're all linked data using hypergraphs. This happens to be cancer data. So what we've done is taken genomics and drugs and genes and proteins, mashed them all up together, just like the brain would link them, and then you pull at one of them, you induce one with a cancer genome, and what you get is the drug that matches that patient. What's really special about this experiment is that there's no human intervention. The human didn't teach the computer what a drug is, or what a patient is, or what cancer is. The computer, because of the way things were linked, in the same way that things are linked in your brain, you can pull at a piece of information and retrieve knowledge. So that's very exciting, and that's leading to some next generation computation.
Okay, so we're just going to talk about deep learning very quickly because I want to summarize and then take questions from you. So as Spyro was saying, so the beauty of deep learning is basically not duplicating the brain, but respecting the brain's architecture and the way we think, and basically put in layers of information so that we can extract new knowledge. So medical intelligence then, or artificial intelligence in medicine, basically on the macroscopic scale, so we talked about the neuron, but needs to do natural language processing so it can understand doctor's notes, for instance. It has to have image recognition, it's a big part of it. Machine learning or mining, data mining, and lastly, be able to make decisions. So those are the 4 big components. And if we layer in the neuronal structure that we just talked about, I think we have a very, very bright future in medicine. And just to give you an idea, this is how I look at artificial intelligence in medicine very quickly in 6 big areas. And I always get asked, where should we invest and where should we focus on? These are the 6 big areas, and I'll go over them very quickly. One is decision support in the hospital. More than half the money now spent in healthcare is in the ICU, and most of it inefficiently because of lack of truly intelligent decision support. And so one solution will be to, this is something we're working on at Chalk, is to take all the data and really put it into a repository and then learn from previous cases and see which cases should be handled how. So I think that's a very exciting area in the future. Another big area is medical imaging and biomedical diagnostics. So right now, a smart algorithm can interpret a CT scan or an MRI better than human radiologists as a group. So it's already beaten an individual radiologist. It's now superseded a group of radiologists reading the same scan. So we're already at that stage. So
we don't have any radiologists in the room, do we? No?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
We're not saying the radiologists are not smart enough. We're just saying it's just the computational power of the computer is just so much faster than a human, although humans are still in some sense smarter. Another area is precision medicine and drug discovery, which is very relevant to your organization, is how the computer is going to be able to, as they say, connecting the dots on cancer, so that it never made sense to me, I'm a cardiologist, it never made sense to me that we give the same heart failure medication to all the patients, we just dose it differently by milligrams per kilo. So in the near future, every single one of you who develop heart failure will get a different recipe, essentially, that's much more precise than what we're doing now. And of course, that applies to cancer. A 4th area would be cloud computing and big data. How do we gather data? How do we share data? What about cybersecurity? And for those of you who are here, new paradigm shifts like blockchain is going to be very important for healthcare security and as well as scalability. So there are advances in technology that will take care of some of the traditional fears that we may have about healthcare data. 5th area is digital medicine and wearable technology. Again, where are we going to be putting all of this new collections of data to affect value in healthcare? And that's something we're starting at Children's Hospital Orange County as well. And lastly, robotic technology and virtual assistants. How can we render the technology in the robotics area to improve patient healthcare as well? So those are 6 big areas, and obviously there are other areas that are being developed as well. But I think the most important thing about medical intelligence or artificial intelligence in medicine is we still need human beings to come together and work on things together, leveraging technology rather than just relying on technology to do everything. So that's one take-home message I want to remind all of us. So this is something that Spyro and I came up with. If you want to understand AI in medicine or healthcare in just a few words, hopefully if we do this right, we're going to make the visible invisible. What do I mean by that? Well, this is what we're seeing in healthcare, right? I mean, computers on wheels. For all of you, when you see a physician, the computer is probably distracting, right? Both of you. It's rare that a physician is going to be able to do this, right? When was the last time a physician did this with you without a computer in the way? And hopefully we won't get to this, which is the ultimate robot physician, which we don't want. What we want is sort of using artificial intelligence to take away the visible obstructive components of medicine, which is the EHR and the computer, and make those visible things that we don't want invisible. And then just to be cute about this, the corollary is true too. It's going to make the invisible visible. And you probably, I see a few heads nodding, so you probably understand where I'm going with this. This is myself rounding with 4 data scientists on rounds, which typically doesn't happen in any hospital, but should be a common occurrence, hopefully in the near future. Because with the data scientists' help in the hospital, it's like the clinicians are wearing a special data science lens, an artificial intelligence lens, to see things very differently that otherwise will be buried and embedded in the data. So we want to be able to then have what we call finally intelligence-based medicine rather than evidence-based medicine. Because intelligence-based medicine means that we're harnessing the power of all that data intelligently to render the practice of medicine a lot more effective. So if you see, let me give this slide to you because we both came up with this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for all of you, evidence-based medicine has failed rare disorders, right? Evidence comes from very large randomized trials. Well, you can't do that for rare conditions when there's just a handful, or sometimes just even a single individual. If you could mine the deep data from a single individual, their genome, their phenotypes, all of the corollary biometrics, integrate them all together, use machine learning, that is what we call intelligence-based medicine. And intelligence-based medicine is compatible with n equals 1 or n equals few. It's perfect for rare disorders, and we think it's the future of how all patients with complex and difficult diseases are going to be treated.
So as a clinician, I think we're only using about 10% of the data, and we need to use the other 90% of data. And to be able to do that, though, as I said, we have to form, humans have to form coalitions so that we can all work together and share data, which is, again, I think the biggest and the first obstacle that we need to overcome. And this is a group of, back then, 21 children's hospitals, but now over 50, coming together and wanting to work as one, the International Society for Pediatric Innovation. And one of our first projects is going to be on how to share data so that we have a meaningful extraction of knowledge and information for helping children with rare diseases. So just a couple of words about cybersecurity. 50% of breaches, healthcare data breaches, have occurred, leading to significant actions in the healthcare system. So that's a very, very important thing to remember in the future. And you want to just talk about blockchain and healthcare?
How many people have heard of blockchain? There's a few of you, great. Probably more of you have heard of Bitcoin. Who's heard of Bitcoin? Yep, more. So the technology behind Bitcoin is blockchain, and blockchain allows you to do something very powerful, which is federate information in a way, and each block allows you to pass information in a way that doesn't allow you to track backwards. It's a game-changing approach for finance, but it could also be game-changing for data sharing. When you, as a family, decide to donate your data, you don't want somebody to be able to track back and figure out where it came from, et cetera. You want it to be useful for scientists, but you want it to be protected against misuse. Blockchain is a technology that's so game-changing, it could revolutionize how we exchange data.
So we just want to publicize also, if you're interested in any of this, we have all the stakeholders coming together, clinicians, data scientists, parents, families, hospital administrators, and investors for our first meeting focusing on artificial intelligence in medicine. Is going to be December 12th to the 15th, right down PCH at the Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Niguel. And there are save-the-date cards out there. I just want to personally thank all of my great friends and colleagues at Children's Hospital Orange County, and my very, very, very patient mentors at Stanford, taking me at this point in my career, and also a lot of special people along the way. So thank you very much.
Thank you both so much, Dr. Chang and Dr. Mousses. That was a wonderful presentation. And we have some time for questions, if anybody would like to ask a question.
Thank you very much. It was a really inspiring talk.
Thank you.
In my mind, I'm trying to make this practical, though. So many of us in this room either literally or figuratively get to be the data inputs for your big data systems. And many of us are either recording information about our families at home, sometimes with great detail, or we're participating in registries, we're gathering data. What do we need to do now? What can we do now in a practical sense to prepare that data to make it the most useful for people like you in the future?
Can you just raise your hand, whoever just asked that? Thank you. Okay, I was looking for it. Okay, you want to take that first, and I'll come back?
That's a great question. What we painted for you is a picture of the future, where we're going. That's the destination, intelligence-based medicine, where each patient could have all of their data, not just part of it, not just a panel of genes or a few clinical phenotypes, all of their data integrated together to make much more intelligent decisions than we can make today. There's a lot of barriers in that roadmap to that destination. The way you can help us today is help us bypass some of those barriers. The first is data sharing. Anthony touched on that. We don't have access to enough data. Anthony's exactly right. There's too much data, but we don't have it, right? We don't have it in our hands. So if you want to get practical, help us get it in our hands. There's a lot of initiatives. You heard about some this morning. The President's is one of the biggest one, but we have little ones. For example, we have a project that we're doing in collaboration with Dell Computers and Intel and the Innovation Institute and Chalk. All of us have come together to build a pediatric cloud where we're putting data in. We want parent advocates to be part of that process. If you stand up next to us, we can bypass some of these ridiculous hurdles that we have in data sharing. So that's one, right? And then when you hear about initiatives that lead to allowing research, repurposing of data. For example, electronic medical records are fine, they're one thing, but when you're participating in a clinical trial, you should not be okay with not getting your data back, right? So what can you do today? Be vocal, because the future of artificial intelligence can't happen without your data.
I think I deal with, I'm still actively in practice and dealing with families almost on a daily basis. And it saddens me that actually on the way over, I got a text from one of the parents and said, have you seen the latest MRI and what is the aorta measuring? Because she was so concerned about that particular number, rightfully so from her daughter. Why is it that in 2016 she can't find that information on her own? So as a parent and as a family member, you actually have tremendous leverage to help us finally have the healthcare system give you the privilege that you deserve, which is seeing your own data. And if you can see your own data, it's going to make it much easier for the rest of us to be able to work with that data. So I think it's a cultural transformation that needs to happen in terms of looking at data, not like something that only certain people in healthcare can look at and own. It should be everyone owning the data. And I think the sooner we get to that point, the faster we're going to get to an amazing couple of decades in medicine.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Kat Davis Ahmed, and I'm with the Familial Hypercholesterolemia Foundation. And I guess it's a comment I wanted to share. One of the projects that we have, familial hypercholesterolemia has both a common and a rare form.
Right.
And so the biggest barrier to care for FH is the lack of diagnosis. And I know that's a problem for many disorders. So what we've done is to build a machine learning algorithm to recognize possible FH patients in a data set. And then with access to 89 million labs and claims data, we ran the algorithm against the the data and came up with a heat map of
for
possible FH in the country. And now we're in the process of reaching out to the healthcare providers to help them identify those patients in their practice. So that'll include the HoFH, the rare and the common, so that we can speed the process. We've been waiting a long time, and we think we can move faster.
Oh, that's an amazing story. We always love hearing stories like that. And one of the most common questions or pushbacks I get from physicians when I talk about AI in medicine is, are you trying to advocate some way of that the AI is going to displace the physicians? And I always say, well, there's plenty of work to do. It's not like just because you have AI, all of a sudden half the physicians won't have to work. As a matter of fact, the physicians, the liberated physicians, because of the burden of all of this before is lifted, is going to be able to come up with new questions, new research directions. There's plenty to do. And I think one computer scientist made the comment that any physicians that's worried about being replaced by a computer should be replaced by a computer. So I always remember that comment.
And congratulations, that's fantastic. This is Soraya. Come talk to us afterwards. We want you to come to this meeting. And I think there's bringing like-minded people together, people who have adopted machine learning, started to apply it to solve problems in rare disorders and other conditions. We want to bring that community together. So in December, it's a great time to do that. Soraya will take your information and make sure you get all the details.
Well, the other thing about, as I said, I was a privileged keynote speaker at a meeting in San Diego this morning to the academic health center's leadership. And what they were saying is, one of the questions I got was, are you saying that we should be training physicians differently based on what you're saying? Should we not train a lot of radiologists? And I said, we're not saying that we shouldn't train radiologists. I'm just saying that we should train the future generation physicians to accommodate what's available in technology. So maybe we don't need millions of radiologists, and rather than focusing on radiology, maybe the subspecialty should be medical imaging in general, and adopting machine learning and deep learning so that medical imaging will be a subspecialty, including pathology and dermatology, and not necessarily just focus on conventional or traditional ways of educating for the next generation of physicians, because when they don't have jobs, they're going to be very, very unhappy alumni to that medical school.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Amy Lietman. I'm with NTM Info and Research. We deal with non-tuberculous mycobacterial lung disease. So a few years ago, we actually helped get adapted an existing registry for patients so that NTM patients could be entered into it. It's physician-entered data. Now we're seeing a shift away from that as the gold standard towards patient-entered data. Mm-hmm. And so we're starting to think about how we can get such a registry built.
Great.
One of the challenges we face is that we're at a more nascent stage, even though this disease has been around for a while, and it's there's been decades of knowledge in terms of these are the drugs you use. The drugs are still off-label. We're in a very nascent stage in terms of discovery. Yeah. They're still using genomics and genetics to discover, like, it's not just a species, it's a subspecies, it's 9 subspecies. It's these treatments work better on these subspecies. So there's so much that we're still learning. So from a practical standpoint, what does it look like to build out that kind of registry so that it's useful to researchers like you? How do we do it so that, it has to be, I'm gathering, fairly flexible so that it can be altered and changed as needed if even one patient comes up with something new that, wow, we've never seen that before.
Yeah, I think you're right on target in saying that we have to really start espousing the concept of patient-initiated clinical research, which for most doctors is a totally foreign concept, as you know. Most of the senior doctors, particularly that I talk to on a day-to-day level, are still, believe it or not, in 2016, talking about randomized controlled trials and getting money from the NIH. First of all, the NIH doesn't have a whole lot of money left to do randomized controlled trials And multiple randomized control trials that I've been part of basically came up with no conclusive evidence or anything. So we have to start thinking differently. The recruitment of patients is really key here because it took Stanford Medical School through like 20 outlying clinics 10 years to recruit 10,000 patients for a hypertension study. Guess how long it took Apple with a research kit to recruit 10,000 patients? So 10 years with Stanford Medical School with a good reputation
Probably less than a
versus
year.
Apple's research kit,
Less than a year?
less than 24 hours. Okay, so, I'm sorry? Yeah. So I think they hit 10,000 by Tuesday morning and released it on Monday. So in other words, it's just magnitude difference in terms of patient recruitment when you talk about empowering our patients and families to do this with data, and hopefully we'll see a whole new paradigm in clinical research. But the thing is, the clinicians need to know that. They need to understand how powerful it is, and they need to finally give up this, professional hubris of the doctor being paternal and is the one that should set up a randomized controlled trial.
Well, but my thing is, from my perspective, it's almost better because we're a patient advocacy organization. Mm-hmm. What I'm hearing from other groups that we've been talking to and where we're thinking of going is that it's almost as though a patient advocacy group should be working with their medical and science board, and they should be owning the registry.
Yes.
For all intents and purposes,
yes.
The advocacy group owns the data,
yes.
So that we get to decide on access and we make it as accessible as possible to whomever needs it.
Yes.
And so then we come to the practical issue of how do we make it good for you guys as researchers? What do we need to do?
Well, I think you need to have a partner. The key word is collaboration for this decade, is collaboration and partnership, meaningful partnership, where it's a symmetric relationship. It's not patients are dominant over the clinicians and clinicians dominating over the patients.
Yeah, if your specific question is how do you make it better, make it more. So have you heard the term deep phenotyping?
Yes.
So in genotyping, we collect 3.2 billion measurements. When we're phenotyping, typically when a disease is characterized, we get like 3 or 4 parameters, 20 if we're lucky, right? So lung disease of a particular type, some histopathology. We want tens of thousands of features. So if you can collect more phenotypic data, if you can collect genomic data, the more orthogonal types of data sets you can collect, that's going to help us tremendously. Because right now, most organizations are not doing it. When you're doing a clinical trial, you're trying to limit the cost. So if you get patient advocates involved, there might be a better way to do that.
So we are actually out of time. I apologize. I imagine that they'd be willing to stay and answer some questions for anybody who has some additional questions. And I thank you all so much. I have a few announcements because in about 15 minutes over in the main ballroom, there will be the pre-reception, the pre-award reception, which is going to be sponsored by Vertex. And that's going to be followed by the Friday evening tribute to Champions of Hope Awards and the Reggae Funk Fest with what is usually very good food. So thank you again, and let's give one last round of applause for Drs. Chang and Mousses, who are so kind to share this with us. Thank you both so very much.